Hello, yogis. Welcome back to Yoga for Dentists. I'm your host, Dr. Josie DeVidio, longtime dentist and certified yoga teacher. Today's episode was originally recorded for my other podcast, Josiology, so feel free to check out the catalog of offerings for that show. This episode can also be found on the Yoga for Dentists podcast, available on your favorite podcast listening app. I also wanted to invite you to hang out with like-minded dental professionals on the Yoga for Dentists Instagram or private Facebook group. I am chatting with Jen Johansson, a licensed school psychologist and a certified meditation teacher. And she teaches people how to decrease their stress and increase their happiness through non-weird meditation. She's also developed this meditation matchmaker framework, which allows her to pair people to their best meditation approach based on their preferences. This is a secular approach to meditation, so it's nothing woo, so you don't have to worry about that. But today we're going to be talking about how she learned to love meditation as a tool to helping her clients. Hello, Jen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be able to chat today.
So I really think that it's important to let our listeners know that meditation does not have to be this thing that's attached to like a religious practice. It's just a tool that you can use to decrease your stress and to be more present in your life.
Yeah, that's right. I like to think of it as like brain exercises too, to really like take the woo-woo out of it. It's just another way to give your brain input and exercise it so it could be performing at its best.
In fact, part of your story as a school psychologist is that you used to roll your eyes at the idea of meditation, correct?
Yes, that was me. I have not been meditating since I was a child or anything like that. I worked as a school psychologist for 12 years in both middle schools and high schools, and I was not meditating at that point when I started in that role or through my training as a school psychologist. It was something that I sort of stumbled on in terms of reading lots of research about this, coming across my desk about all these academic research studies about the benefits of this practice and how it helps with anxiety and depression and emotional regulation, things that I needed to work on myself as coping strategies in my career, but also what I saw my students and their families needing too. So at first I was a complete eye roll, like really like sitting and doing quote unquote nothing is going to change everything. Like it's going to help all these things that we have all these other interventions for that we need more help with. But I am a scientist. Like that's my background with really taking that research and putting it into practice. And I really felt like I couldn't ignore it anymore. And I almost started it as like a challenge, like this isn't going to work. So I did start, and really I was completely surprised how much of a difference I felt with my own personal stress. And that's when I started trying to use it with other students and families that I was working with.
Well, and Jen, kudos to you, because I think as a scientist, everything that you learn and study has to have evidence supporting it, right? So there are studies that happen. If you do X and Y, you're going to get Z. And if you can repeat that pattern, then, excluding all the variables, then you can say that statistically this is proven. So as a scientist, we do get caught up in sort of like one way of thinking, like either you prove it to me or it doesn't count, right? And unfortunately, there are a lot of things that do work that don't have studies to back it up because, nobody's put money into studying certain things. But it's clear, like as you're saying, that more and more research is showing that the process of meditation, and that's going to look different for everyone, but it is having health and wellness benefits for people. So I applaud you for being a scientist who is willing to look at something that you were not used to hearing about and exploring it. A lot of scientists do go into certain things like this, hoping to prove it wrong, right? Like there's no way that this can work. So I'm going to study it just to poke holes in this theory. And a lot of times, even through the process of trying to prove it wrong, the skeptic ends up becoming a believer because they see that it's actually doing what it claims to do. So when you first started meditating for your own personal well-being, what did that look like for you?
That looked like downloading an app, which I think most people, that's how they first get started because they hear about apps. So I started with the app Headspace, which was one of the most popular meditation apps. And this was years ago when there weren't nearly as many as there are now. So that was like one of the main ones. So I downloaded the app and got started. I had some stops and starts. I'm not going to say like, oh, I was perfect in my meditating from the very beginning. I didn't do it every day. At the beginning, I was what I call now a crisis meditator. When I was really stressed, I would really amp up my practice and do more and spend some more time and make sure it happened for 10 minutes every day. And then things would get better. And I would sort of like step off the gas a little bit because things are better. I didn't need this thing. And of course, that would be cyclical and then come back and the stress would come back. And so now I've much more even in my everyday-ish practice of even when things are really good of meditating to make sure things stay good instead of waiting for them to sort of reach that crisis mode again. So that's sort of how I got started. And then since I had some moderate success with that, that's how a lot of times I would broach it with students or families I would be working with about the best way to get them started. And I also learned pretty quickly that just handing someone an app, no matter how spectacular that app is, a lot of times people need some more support. Just like handing someone an exercise app without some more support around that, oftentimes is not super successful. So it's a great tool to have in your meditation toolbox.
Yeah, I agree. And, you bring up a good point. When you first start meditating, like I'm a huge fan of meditation. I believe that it can be really helpful for people. Personally, I am a work in progress because, like any habit that you're trying to create, it's hard at first to remember to do it, to make time to do it. So right now I'm breaking it down to make it even simpler for myself. And I'm not trying to put the pressure on to have any specific set of time to meditate. But, sometimes I have to meditate when I'm at a red light, something's bugging me or I'm feeling tense for some reason. And I just try to focus on my breathing. So it can be something as simple as that. But it is a habit that you have to form and you have to give yourself grace. Like, you can't just be like, oh, well, I did it twice. It didn't help me. So I'm going to stop. Or you can't say to yourself, oh, I'm terrible at this. I can't do it every day. So I'm just going to stop. You're a work in progress all the time.
Exactly. And a lot of times you might not notice any difference. Like, let's say you have 5 minutes and you focus on your breath for those 5 minutes and feel some calm, but then you come out of that 5-minute time and you're feeling that stress again. So you're like, oh, this didn't work. It's also noticing those little moments throughout your day where your stress might be impacting you differently. So not just expecting like unicorns and rainbows to happen right when you're doing it, but just noticing it throughout the day, how you might be reacting to different things.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what our brain is telling us when we're stressed. I think it would be helpful to understand what the stress is telling us.
Our brain is really connected to our nervous system. So when we're feeling stress, we go into something called fight or flight. Our brains have evolved over millions of years, but we still react the same to stress as we did millions of years ago. When a tiger was coming towards us and our brain goes into fight or flight, are we going to run? Are we going to fight? And making that decision of what we're going to do. But it takes our nervous system out of the digestion phase. It takes our immune system down because all of our resources are going into that immediate threat. So it's not concerned about digesting your food. It's not concerned about making sure you're staying healthy in terms of your immune support because right now you have an immediate threat. So our brains still act like that when we get an angry email or someone cuts us off in traffic. It hasn't evolved to the point where it can differentiate the type of threat. Stress is stress. So meditation really helps your nervous system get that feedback to go into the present moment, to take yourself out of that fight or flight mode so that you're able to bring your other bodily functions back online, things that are very important, digestion, immune system response, things like that.
Yeah, especially for people who have underlying medical conditions. I know for me, I have celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease, which I joke that it's a cruel disease to have when you're Italian because it means you can't eat wheat or bread or pizza or pasta, tiramisu, cannolis. I'm not bitter about it at all. But when you have an autoimmune issue, basically what that means is your body is turning on itself. Mm-hmm. And so stress is like the worst thing that can happen because as you mentioned, when you're stressed, your brain is saying, I can't fight your other problems. I need to deal with, this immediate threat. So for someone who has autoimmune issues, the stress allows your autoimmune issue to kind of go even more rogue because no one's paying attention. Your brain's busy doing something else. So it is particularly important to manage your stress if you have underlying medical conditions.
And also just to notice, it gives you practice. I think meditation's biggest superpower is giving you practice of noticing what you're thinking, because we have so many thoughts a day. Between 50 and 80,000 thoughts are running through our brains every day. And we don't really notice them. Like, it's just that squawking, that voice in our head that's just constantly going. And to actually like give yourself the pause to actually hear what this voice is saying and the opportunity to question that voice, to say, oh, I'm feeling left out, or I'm feeling jealous that this person has this or is doing this. Why am I feeling like that? How can I fix that? Should I be feeling jealous? Like, I have X, Y, and Z over here. So giving yourself that pause to notice that thought and to be able to question it, I think is meditation's biggest superpower that can be applied to the stress of everything, to really be able to analyze what we're saying to ourselves.
Absolutely. I know for me, when I take moments of pause, like intentionally, even if I'm not meditating per se, right now I'm to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm just going to sit here for 3 minutes and do nothing. Can I even do that? Because I'm a doer by nature. So I like to be busy. I like to be doing things. But the most profound ideas or thoughts come to me when I'm not doing anything. And so for those of us who have kids who are raising them, that's something that we really need to impart in them, because our kids are used to always having something to do. If they're not doing homework or their sports, then now they're on their phones playing games or chatting with friends or whatever. They really don't have any free time, any time to be bored, any time to just think, any time to process information or feelings. And I know for me personally, that's when my best ideas come to me, is when I am doing nothing.
I was just going to say, when you let your mind wander and see what happens, because like you talked about, everyone's getting so much input. It's when are you having time to actually like process it or have some time for output?
Absolutely. So Jen, I want to talk about how to get started with this non-weird meditation.
Perfect.
Tell our listeners, what do you mean by non-weird meditation, and how do people get started doing this?
I mean the non-woo-woo type. I think a lot of people, when they think of meditation, they think about someone who does yoga, sitting cross-legged on a beach, being serene and silent. And that doesn't really seem attainable for most people. I know when I started, and even now, that's not attainable for me. I live in the middle of the country. There are no beaches around, and I have 2 little boys. There's not a lot of stillness and silence in my day. So making it approachable and doable, while, like you said, while you're sitting at a stoplight, while you're making dinner, in those little tiny moments that you don't need to take a vacation or spend 5 days on a mountain retreat learning how to do this thing. That's what I mean by non-weird, just everyday people doing it in their everyday lives.
You have this great website that's named after you, jenjohansson.com, which is perfect. But on there, you have an opt-in called Meditation Matchmaker. It's free. And what listeners can do if they're interested is go on there and take a quiz.
Yes, it's just a couple of multiple choice questions. It should just take less than 2 minutes. I also have learned through my learning and teaching about all different types of meditation. When I got started, most people just think meditation's like focusing on your breath or something with your breath, because that's the kind you read about the most. It's probably the most popular, and for good reason, because you always have your breath with you, and your breath also is a really great gateway to that nervous system that we talked about earlier. But there's lots of other amazing types of meditation that some people really resonate with more. They find them less boring, and the more interesting you find it, the more likely you're going to do it and stick with it. So finding that type that really resonates with you is really important to me. And so just answering a couple questions. At the end, it'll tell you your type. And if you decide to put in your email address, I will email you a quick 5-minute meditation of that type to get you started.
So in other words, there are different ways to meditate that might suit different personality types better. right? Like there are some people who know they're not going to be able to sit still and meditate. So maybe there's a walking meditation, or maybe there's, right, all these different kinds.
Yes, walking. And if you have to keep your eyes open, there's one for you, whether you want to feel more happiness or calm, what kind of feeling you want to feel. So there's lots of different options.
So if I'm going to your website and I'm looking at this quiz, I'm answering questions that's going to help your system determine what would be the best way for me to meditate based on how I answer the questions.
Exactly.
Let's say that if you're a super busy person like me who finds it hard to sit still, how would I get started with this meditation practice?
I would start small, just sitting and noticing your breath, either doing the meditation matchmaker and getting that short meditation, but you don't even need a guided meditation. A lot of times for beginners, I found it's easier to do that guided meditation, to have someone in your ear walking you through. It feels less overwhelming that way. But for some people, they like to be able to do it anywhere and everywhere. So just sitting down and noticing your breath, like just notice how your body feels. Notice how you're sitting, the contact points of either your feet on the ground or your butt in the chair or wherever you are. How just noticing your body in space is incredibly grounding, something anyone can do without a recording. And just the biggest part of that is noticing the thoughts that come up, because they're going to come up. You're thinking all the time, just noticing them. So you're trying to think about your feet on the ground and how that feels and actually noticing it. And your brain is in your ear talking about what you need to be doing instead, what you should be marking off your to-do list, or an email you need to send, or someone you need to text back, and not responding to that thought, but just noticing it. So just saying, oh, I'm thinking right now, and not getting mad at yourself, because you are going to think. That's the whole point of this, is noticing that, just noticing your thinking, and then going back to whatever you were focusing on, whether that was how your feet feel on the ground, etc. So thoughts during meditation actually mean you're doing it right, because you're noticing those thoughts. And that's the biggest magic of meditation, is noticing those thoughts. So you're just getting lots and lots of practice of noticing thoughts.
I think that's a common misconception that people have about meditation. Like they've heard that you need to clear your mind and make it empty, and, like this mental dumping. And I think that's why a lot of people get frustrated when they try it, because you can't do that. Your brain will not allow that to happen. Right. I mean,
exactly.
I think there may be some Buddhist monks somewhere in Nepal who can do that. But for the rest of us, we're normal people who have a lot of stuff going on all the time. So I think you have to understand that it is okay to have thoughts. And as you said, it's okay to just notice them and then either pay attention to what they're telling you or go, okay, that's interesting. And now let me get back to, oh yeah, my butt's going numb in this chair. Let me shift a little bit or whatever. Because that is a really observant skill set in and of itself. I was just watching a YouTube video by a guy whose name I can't pronounce. He is a monk in Nepal somewhere, but he did this guided meditation. In fact, I'm going to post the link to that video that I watched on the show notes for this. It was about an hour long. I mean, I listened to him speaking. I listened to him speaking in some event, and then part of his talk, he did the meditation with the audience. So I'll post that on the notes for this show if you're interested, my listeners. But part of what his meditation was about was just sitting in your chair and recognizing what your body feels like where are the pressure points? You feel pressure on your legs. You feel pressure on your bottom. How do your feet feel? How do your arms feel? What are they doing? Do you need to shift? And it was kind of interesting because it seems so simple, but we are pretty oblivious to how our body feels throughout the day unless you're really focusing on that. Mm-hmm. And so for me, when I did this exercise with this video, I'm like, oh, I think my bra's too tight. I need to get rid of this bra, right? I've had this bra for a long time and I wear it all the time, but I don't pay attention. But now that I'm sitting still and paying attention to every sensation in my body, I'm like, oh yeah, I think this bra's too tight. I think it's time to let it go, right? So it's funny what you'll notice if you just take the time to pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And because we have so much data coming into our brains all the time that it has to sort it out for us and really only show us and have us attend to what it really deems to be quote unquote important in that moment. And a lot of times how our body's feeling, unless we're trained and actually noticing that, it's one of those things that just gets filtered out because other things are taking precedent. So it's amazing what you'll notice. And also with eating, that really goes with eating too, to really pay attention to am I really hungry right now? Or am I feeling some emotion that I'm trying to not feel? And my go-to strategy is, sugar or gluten or anything else. So it's really interesting to just notice your body. And it takes seconds just to actually like sit and be like, I'm going to notice what my body's feeling right now.
I have another question for you. We're talking about the kind of meditation where we're allowing our thoughts to enter in. But for a long time, I was listening to guided meditation podcasts because I love podcasts. And basically, these were short little podcasts that would take you through a visualization, right? So you would sit still and the lovely lady whose very calm voice was speaking through the speakers through my headphones would guide you through a meditation. Now, my experience was when that's happening, I'm so focused on what she's saying and trying to visualize that I don't really allow for any other thoughts to come in. So what do you think about that?
I think that's another tool in your toolbox. And I think people just trying that and seeing if that resonates with them, if that helps them feel more calm because they're just following what they are saying and doing visualization. But also noticing like when you're doing the visualization, depending how long it is, a lot of times, at least for me personally and what other people have talked about, you still are having thoughts come in where all of a sudden you're like, oh, what is she saying right now? Like, where am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to be doing? I was over here thinking about this. So again, it's sort of the same practice in that way of noticing that I was off on a different planet at the moment. I wasn't attending, and then just noticing that and going back. So again, that's just practice, another way to practice. So it's a different type of strategy. And it's another way that some things really resonate with some people, and other ways they prefer more of the open-ended, letting thoughts in and out strategy. So it's just figuring out what works for you. And also on different days, some days I do some visualization and other days I do more different types of meditation of keeping it interesting so that you'll want to keep doing it.
Yeah, and that's a good point. You don't have to be committed to one way or the other. You can try different things, and on different days, you're feeling different ways, and something might be more soothing than something else. So that's a good point. I don't know why I feel like I need to pick one and stick with it. But you're right. When I was doing that visualization sort of meditation, I would start to wander as well. Like she would be talking about snowflakes and I'd be like, oh yeah, that time in Whistler when we did this or that, like I just
Exactly.
ended up in something else. So you're right. Your brain does whatever it wants to do. Now you speak about something called a meditation triangle. Can you tell me what that's about?
Sure. That is multiple different ways to bring meditation, mindfulness to your day. And they sort of all work together to really decrease your stress. So the first part of that triangle is what I call the 911 response. So that's something that your body and your mind deems stressful. An angry email, a tantruming child, a teenager talking back to you, interaction with your boss that did not go exactly the way you would want it to go. So you're like feeling that stress. It's a quick breathing technique to just get you out of that stress response in that moment. You're not going to sit down and be like, excuse me, I need like 5 minutes to go meditate. You just need a couple seconds to basically reset your nervous system. So that's just a strategy to get you out of that fight or flight in that moment and get yourself calmed down so that you can choose how to respond. And that response might be, a snarky comeback or something like that. It doesn't have to be a peaceful response if that's what you choose it to be. But the point is that you get to choose that response instead of just responding like a knee-jerk reaction. And then 5 minutes later, you're like, oh, what did I just do? So it's figuring out how you want to respond and making a conscious decision to do it instead of just wondering what happened later when it's like your brain, your reflex just took over. The second part of that triangle is basically grounding yourself into the present moment. These are different strategies to make it more of a habit during the day. You mentioned the stoplight earlier, and that's actually one of the ways I ground myself into the present moment. Every time I'm at a stoplight, I call it to myself a present signal to just notice things around me instead of picking up my phone and scrolling anything. Just noticing like the stitching on my steering wheel, what the clouds look like. It's amazing how much stimulus we have around us that we don't even notice. So just really grounding myself into the present moment and using things that happen during the day anyway, and not having to add something to my day, but just that prompt to get myself to really go into that present moment. And then the third part of that meditation triangle is a daily just sitting down, quiet practice, what people a lot of times think of traditional meditation. You don't have to be sitting cross-legged. You could be laying down. All you have to do is be comfortable, but just 5 to 10 minutes every day for that's really like where the practice comes in of getting those foundations set so that the other two parts of the triangle come more easily. So those three things work together, and two of those three things only take seconds or less every day.
Awesome. Now, on your website, you do offer an e-course called The School of Calm, which I think is awesome. I love the title of that.
Oh, thank you.
Tell us what that's all about.
That goes through a lot of the steps of figuring out how to meditate, figuring out your tools to put in your toolbox, as well as keeping you going. So we look at finding the why is how we start. Figuring out, we look at some of the science, some of the research behind it. For a lot of people, that really gives you background of like why this thing is important and why it has worked for a lot of people, but also finding like your personal why, like why are you personally doing this? And then also getting the stage set. So what tools you need. You don't need to go buy a cushion. You don't really need anything to meditate. You need yourself. That's all you need. So, but dispelling those myths about all these things that just like exercise equipment that people can just keep buying because they feel like it's going to make them exercise more. Dispelling those myths of what you need to actually meditate. How to respond to thoughts is a big thing we teach in the course because you have thoughts. And a lot of times people will judge those thoughts like, oh, I'm thinking again, or I can't meditate because I'm thinking again, and get really mad at themselves. And it sounds easy to not judge your thoughts, but it takes a lot of practice to actually do it. And so teaching strategies of how to turn around those thoughts and how to respond to those thoughts non-judgmentally with some strategies is something we teach. We look at all the different types of meditation to give you an overview of looking at specifically your type, but just a little smattering of the other types too, so you can sort of pick and choose if something else sounds interesting or if you want to mix it up a little bit. We work on creating your own triangle, that meditation triangle of your strategies in each of those 3 points, and then really work on habit change and making that habit stick.
Wow, that's very thorough. So I'm looking forward to checking that out myself.
Oh, thank you. I was really excited to put it together and really use apps as a tool, but really this framework to wrap all the way around.
Are you hanging out on social media at all?
I am. I am on Instagram and Facebook at my name, Jen Johansson.
So listeners, if you're interested in learning more about Jen Johansson, her meditation matchmaker, or her e-course called The School of Calm, you should check her out at jenjohansson.com or on Instagram and Facebook at Jen Johansson. I'm going to have the links to all three of those on the show notes for this episode. If you're jogging or driving right now, you can always see the show notes for this episode for those links. Jen, thank you so much for joining me today and chatting with me about this non-weird meditation. I hope that our listeners will learn from today and put it into practice for themselves.
Thanks so much.